what we're going to do today is we're going to go through what we think are some best practices and things we've seen in agencies from a application standards, how you get the application, how you get the information, and how that can have a significant impact to the loss control perspective, as well as some different approaches and techniques from auditing and controls. And then there were a couple of follow-up items that we captured at the end that we'll kind of go through and then have an open forum for any other questions that would happen to come up. So again, same group on. Stephanie, I think you were missing in session 1, but Stephanie Garza is our Director of Support. Myself, David Hollingsworth, and Mark Michaels joining you guys again for this session. To refresh your memory, the way we had set this up, session 1 really had a lot to do with some of the best practices you can make sure are in place as it relates to how you vet the client, how you look for red flags, how you have the right conversation, how you make sure that you're doing your due diligence up front to make sure it's a risk you want to entertain. That's going to kind of shift today then, and we're going to talk a lot more around assuming that sale has been made. What are the things that you can do as it relates to the application, the process within the agency itself, and different ways for you to be able to monitor how are your losses performing, and maybe some things that you can look at so that you can keep a good handle on things. Our experience, David's got the most of it, but our experience would be this is a great example. If you don't measure it and you don't monitor it, it's going to control you versus you controlling it. You can't, there's no perfect way to be able to know anytime somebody's going to be a bad risk per se, but there are clearly some things you can do upfront as well as after the fact to be able to limit the impact it may have to you and your business. So when we were putting this together, we wanted to kind of think about starting first from an application standpoint. Agencies really must have what we would call a defined, and by defined, it's not, I can go ask somebody in the office. It's something that's actually written down. So do you have a written process as it relates to who has what responsibilities? The agent that's selling and the office that's processing. Maybe it's bifurcated and one person does one thing and one another. Maybe everybody does it, but you need a written process of specifically what people are doing. That process needs to include what all is part of that process. Step by step, what's getting completed, what's getting submitted, what's getting gathered from an information standpoint. You also need to define how that information is being submitted and the timing of that. We have talked to many agencies in the past where they have a process, but they actually don't adhere to some timing pieces. And I would tell you, Mark and Stephanie have bumps and bruises and probably some open wounds where we're regularly trying to shake people down for information that they think an agent may think may be nice to have. But from our standpoint, as it relates to having a complete file and making sure we have all of our I's dotted and T's crossed, the urgency that they have and the urgency we have sometimes doesn't quite match up. And then, as we mentioned throughout this, you're going to have carrier unique situations. And it may be what they look for. It may be the information that you need to get. It may actually be the way that information is gathered. But my perception from the SNA group is you all participate in writing business from kind of a core group of carriers. But I don't know how well you have one hub. We talked about it before. I don't know how well you have one hub of information that is in one place that everybody be able to keep those records current. Carriers are regularly changing the rules of the game. I can tell you we have a Tuesday sales call, and it seems like every week we've got a notification to the group of something that a carrier has changed. They're in a market, they're out of a market. They've changed the rules. They've limited what they'll write. They changed the criteria. Those things got to be adhered to, because thinking that you've got the most current information and then being surprised in ambush kind of disrupts everybody, including the client. Mark, David, any other comments on this one?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. You made the statement about measurement. If you don't really have a process, you can't really measure it. So you won't be able to know what's right, wrong, and indifferent, and where opportunities are for improvement. So that's important as to why we talk about process a lot. The other thing you'll hear us do, and I caught myself yesterday, you'll hear us reference our Tuesday, what we call success calls. And yes, they're predominantly producer focused, but we invite our service people to participate in those meetings, and we have weekly service meetings as well. So we work really hard on sharing information and talking about carrier uniquenesses, who's in, out of the markets, all that. So when we reference a sales call, please remember we include our service people to the extent Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but we try to include our service leaders for sure in those meetings so they can participate and interact with our producers at the same time.
That's correct.
And one of the things is that, you know, you may be asking, okay, why do we need the application standards? I think a lot of times it's, I mean, my answer is, hey, E&O claims, you know, so we got to know, you know, kind of what's going on. The carrier is going to ask you, do you have your process? Do you have, what's your standard? So, you know, to protect against the E&O claims, I mean, this is very important.
Right. So from the group, just out of curiosity, I know yesterday the folks on the call seemed to indicate they all had a documented process. What's the folks today? Do you have what you think is a pretty clearly, consistently documented process for applications and the processing of them? So back to my original question. Is there, do the folks have a documented process? Yes? Okay, Tim. We'll go with that then.
I'll turn myself off mute. Yes, I do. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Good. You understand the value then of how that can play and how that consistency is necessary.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
Yep.
So when we were putting this together, one of the things that we were trying to call out that can create some uniquenesses, right? So if on the far left of the kind of the sequence here, you've got a client. We talked about the importance in session one, how it's really important to not just quote, for instance, monoline. You want to have a full account, but let's assume we've got a client that's ready to go. Part of what you may need to think about is, okay, if I'm meeting with that person in face-to-face, or if I'm meeting with them virtually, does that have an implication of the information that I need to gather and or the information that I'm verifying? So wet signature, electronic app, those kinds of things. Then when you come to, okay, let's go ahead and finalize the order. Let's make sure that we've got everything documented as it relates to what they're actually going to buy and purchase. How does that occur within your agency? And then how is the quote unquote buying process completed? Again, these may be all the same people, these may be handoffs, but we call that to your attention because when there are handoffs, you do open yourself up for things that get missed, things that get overlooked, or they'll assume one person's got it versus another. So you got to make sure in your process that you've considered that. And then lastly, once that account has been bound, how is it submitted to the carrier? We know from all the different carriers we work with, there's various methods of that as it relates to, is there an upload process? Do they require a physical application? What does that look like? And make sure that not only you've got it documented, but that one on the right is clearly the one where if there is a carrier unique requirement or criteria that's necessary, make sure it's captured. And I know Stephanie, Mark, give some context to this from your perspective.
I would say it's important to know who's doing what. A lot of times there's a confusion sometimes on our end of who's actually submitting the applications, who's taking charge of making sure that those are going to go through audit, because we do have a process for those to be submitted. And so is that you? Is that your processor? Knowing whose role is follow process is important on that end.
Yeah.
Mark,
And
I
I
don't know if you
think-
wanted to.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is just to make sure you're thorough when you go through this process. This is kind of what, what makes the file, makes the policy, and you don't want to go back and have to correct things. So take some time, don't rush through it, and make a quality policy there.
One of the things we talked about yesterday was the need to make sure we had current photos and the current evaluation of the values.
I'm assuming for the group, I'm assuming
Yeah.
this is no new news for you. If you've got a documented process, I'm assuming you've captured the variances across this, and these are things that you've accounted for and know who's on first, right, as it relates to doing these pieces. Great. So let's kind of shift. Stephanie, I know yesterday, if you can do the same, this is kind of, I think, our general agent checklist, right, from a new business application standpoint, if you can walk through some of that and share with us what we're looking for and maybe how that all kind of came about.
Yes, and earlier you kind of talked about adapting to what's happening in the industry, and so this to update so that, am I freezing up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you want to turn your video off,
Okay.
you're probably okay. Yep.
If you, yes, I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off
Yep, you're good.
to help with the connection. So we continuously look at this to evolve it, to make sure that it is still meeting expectations and still protecting us as an agency as insurance changes, as the demands of the carriers change in the market. So there's some items on here that are a little bit newer just based on what's happening in our world. But we're always looking for a signed application. And we do get some pushback sometimes because not every carrier requires you actually submit a physical application with signatures. Some of them will take the quote that you did in the system, your binding application. The problem there is that you as the producer are the one inputting that information. And so if there's a miscommunication or if there's a data error between what the client wanted and what you put in the quote, we potentially have an issue and we can't prove that's what the client requested. So we always want a signed application. I'll even take the signing off on it and saying, this is what I wanted. These are the coverages that I requested. We're looking for an agency fee form or waiver, an electronic policy authorization. That is a document that we get signed so that clients can elect to have their policies electronically delivered via email or through our portal, our client portal. We send documents securely through a link that they can access in their portal. We need to have the basic policy info in our system. That's more so for our producers. And then the AM Best rating acknowledgement. So we do require clients acknowledge that they're being placed with a carrier that is not AM Best rated. That's become a big deal for us in Texas, specifically with our coastal area and carriers that will write or will not write in the coastal area. Their options are limited. We really don't have AM Best carriers that will write with wind anymore. It's different. Flood rejection. We're looking for them having flood insurance with us. That's our number one priority, to sell the flood insurance. And if they refuse, then we're going to seek to have rejection. The wind hail exclusion is did you want to add something on the flood, Mark? They're pretty strict on the wind and hail exclusions if it's not included. So they will remind you after binding if they don't get that. So additional requirements for excess and surplus as for non-admitted carriers. And we will be sending these documents out to the group. That came up yesterday. The Texas due diligence form, this is our documentation that we have attempted to place the business with an admitted carrier and outlined who those carriers were and why. And then the non-admitted disclosure is actually an explanation to the customer of what it means to be placed with a non-admitted carrier, what that means for them, and them acknowledging. We're looking for the signed PIP rejection if they did not select the coverage. I've seen a lot of small, mind you, but E&O issues over the years for PIP, personal injury protection. That's kind of the first thing they're looking for in an accident when somebody gets hurt. Did they have PIP? No. If not, and the carriers do require us to keep that on file, because I assure you, if you ask them for it, they don't have it. The uninsured and underinsured motorist selections or rejections. The tort coverage and the stacked is specific to our Pennsylvania business. Agent of record transfers, if we're not actually getting an application, we're having business transferred in. We don't just transfer the policy and call it a day. We need to look at what is being transferred over, look at the policy, and then we have a documented review that the agent looked over their existing policy and what recommendations and changes they made. And then
So,
finally,
ahead, Steph.
on actually having those in the file, there's the rare instance where a client is just dragging the ball or not. We really want to get those documents signed because that's everything we have for the file.
Yeah, and one thing we do each month, you'll see there kind of at the bottom where it talks about 3 attempts for signatures must be documented in the form of an activity in AMS. AMS is our system. So this is the checklist for the producers. We run monthly reports for new business, and we have our support folks that are looking for this information in the files. If they're not listed, if it's not in the file or in AMS, we send them some reminders. If it's not done, after about two or so reminders, then we do charge them $100. So there is a consequence for not having the information there. That's how important it is.
Mark and Stephanie, from your guys' perspective, I mean, obviously, I'm going to assume hopefully that the folks on the call here have a similar list or a checklist, right? But in your experience, as you see, if clients don't follow through on information that we have to beg and scratch and claw to try to get, is there a conclusion or a tendency that obviously you can't tell if they're necessarily going to be a bad risk, right? But I'm assuming that that's just another criteria we use to say, look, if the client's not willing to follow through and fulfill, that's probably a client that's not a good fit for us, correct? Yeah. Okay. So for the group, and again, we will send this checklist as a follow-up so you can see a little more clearly. But same kind of question. Is there anything that you guys include or cover from a checklist standpoint that we've missed or that's unique for instance, Georgia business that you have through time and maybe experience realize you need to make sure get covered?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jeannie.
Okay. I mean, for the most part, anytime we do policies here, depending on what carrier it is, a lot of ours, yes, everything is electronic. You submit the app and everything, but we always try to keep a signed paper copy, or we do keep a signed paper copy of the application in the file. We always go over the application before we submit, let the customer know what coverages they have. If we have to make any final changes right there, well, I'm not comfortable with this, or I prefer this. we always try to do that. If there's an electronic draft that we're setting up, we have a signed copy of that. When you flip over to broker side, of course, they want the signed applications. So we do have to upload those, and then whatever payment plan the insured is planning on doing, we keep copies of everything in the file, because if something comes up, we need to make sure we can get our hands on it. If I'm not here and Amy's here one day and she needs to look at something for a client, she needs to be able to get her hands on it. So we try to be meticulous with that at all possible. We use our management system, upload stuff in there, any correspondence with customers. We can text them, email them, and all through that. So you have that documentation at any point in time.
Yeah. I have a question for the group. Has anybody had a carrier audit placed on them? Where the carrier comes in and says, hey, I want to see the last month of new business. Just curious. Oh,
So,
maybe. Yeah, somebody has. Yep.
This is Troy Paget. We got audited by Nat Gen about 6 months or so ago.
Oh, did you? What did
Yeah,
they
it's
come
a-
in and ask for?
They sent a checklist of what they needed. So signed apps was one. If it was a new purchase, they wanted a copy of the settlement statement proving that it was a new purchase. A couple other similar documents, proof of alarm system if you gave them an alarm, Iscential monitored alarm discount.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's pretty
Good.
standard. The only one that was a little odd was the HUD closing statement, the first page of that.
Of that. Okay, good.
Yeah, that was
So,
that was one
yeah.
that was we were a newly appointed Nat Gen agency, only been
Gotcha.
writing for them for about 6 months, and that was kind of buried in their requirements that we
Okay.
were unaware of. So
Yeah, and a lot of the carriers will do that periodically. But since y'all were a new client, that's probably why they did it, so soon. So.
any other comments on this piece as it relates to checklist? And then what we wanted to also call out these have been hit a little bit, right? But in addition, some of the things that we're starting to see, maybe by product line or coverage type, that are either more emphasized or have emerged, right? So on the auto side, the signing of no business use document, and photo documentation of vehicle with any upgraded accessories. On the property side, the roof age verification. Mark, I'll get to you here in a second because I think you should share the story what we did share yesterday, as well as that same signed no business at residence document, and then the ENS again the signed acknowledgement of a non-admitted carrier placement. But I think yesterday, Mark, you may have a comment in all three, but I know you talked about the roof. Why don't you share with the group on that?
Yeah, absolutely. On the roof age verification, what we're starting to see as far as a trend, and this was with, I believe, Travelers. Whenever the producer wrote the policy, they did not really know exactly what the age of the roof was. So they knew it was, anywhere from 15 to 25. For some reason, they put 25 years down. So this was memorialized in the deck page that the roof was 25 years old. Well, the customer had a hail claim, of course. Adjuster goes out and writes up the estimate to replace the roof and applies depreciation based upon a 25-year-old roof. Of course, there's going to be some significant depreciation being taken for that 25-year-old roof. The homeowner then remembered, you know what, my roofer installed this, I believe, 15 years ago. So they were able to get an affidavit from the roofer saying, I installed this in whatever year, whatever it was. And then what they did is submit it to the underwriter. Actually, we were trying to go through the claim adjuster to just make a quick change. I mean, it would just be 25 versus 15 on their estimate, right? No, the adjuster said we've got to go through underwriting to make that change. So we're having to submit that to underwriting. Underwriting has to make the change in the policy. then they'll notify the claim rep. So it's kind of a long drawn out deal. So that's why we're seeing more and more of this, that first application as far as age is what they're taking.
Any other comments on these things, whether Mark and Stephanie or from the group, as it relates to things you're seeing or things that have kind of popped up due to some different risk tolerances?
And yeah, just be careful on the auto piece. Everybody, has a side business and slaps a sign on their truck or car or whatever. So be careful there.
So then when we start to shift and think then that you've got the holistic checklist, you're making sure you've got everything so that you can have a complete file, and even in the example given, right, that you can get through a audit or a field review fairly easily. These are some of the things that are in place or should be in place, right? So from an agency standpoint, again, I think your comment was great where you didn't realize that there was a HUD requirement from that front page. Knowing what meets that carrier's compliance, again, whether it's a new appointment or existing one where they've gotten change, you really need to make sure that you update those records and thoroughly look at those. Mark mentioned it early on, and again, a lot of what we talked about in the first session and the second session is obviously not isolated to reducing losses. There's no silver bullet for your loss ratio to be perfect, right? Now, there's a lot of steps that you can take that are the right kind of due diligence, but many of these things have a broader impact. So for instance, this will clearly do, a lot of things were mentioned, will clearly help you if you're in an E&O situation. Did I do the right thing? Did I do the right, follow the right process? Did I get the right kind of sign-offs and acknowledgements? And then holistic view of the client. And Stephanie, I know that you mentioned holistic view yesterday. If you want to kind of talk about it from your perspective and what you see and how important it is.
Yes. So obviously, when we're putting all the documentation and all of the information in there from the beginning, one, you're wanting to protect yourself and protect the agency. But the other way to look at it is, do you have information that you collected at the very beginning in those early conversations that you're going to want to remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line? If they owned a business and you didn't get the business insurance off the bat, what their hobbies are they into extreme sports or things that could be a gateway to down the road. And so I would just look at making sure that you've got all of their policy information as well as personal details about them that maybe could help your service team when they get the phone call and they see that they're a pet lover and they run a dog shelter out, and help improve that relationship as well as help you later down the road when you are meeting with that client again, how good it would look that you remember details from when you first met.
And hopefully that's a regular practice for everybody. One thing that we've seen, and what Stephanie probably brings it up, is look, our producers and agents probably have a very good mental picture of a client and holistically that view of the client. What we try to strive is that information it can be helpful in some moments of truth to everybody, right? So somebody in the service area that is handling the situation with a client and the agent's not involved, having that holistic knowledge can really kind of even reinforce the relationship you have with the client. And then on the carrier side, again, we talked about the checklist and understand the carrier audit cadence. I mean, Mark, you spent many years from a claim standpoint. David was in the carrier relation piece. We can't emphasize enough, carriers really appreciate if you're proactively talking to them as it relates to the things that you're employing within your agency to try to write quality business, right? having a process, sharing that stuff proactively with them versus, oh, by the way, I'm in hot water and I'm trying to recover. You're going to find that goes a long way in that relationship, overall relationship with your carrier partners.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, well said, Brad, because the more you can share with them that you're concerned and focused on that stuff, one, they'll give you some leeway, and two, they'll work with you to try to make sure you can write as much business as you possibly can. So it's a win-win.
Good. So then some of the controls that can be put in place. I mean, we talked about it in general in the first session, right? But the reviewing of the underwriting trends and activities. We don't know all the different forums that you guys interact, but it's well worth your time if you can find a few minutes to say across agencies, hey, are you seeing this trend with the X carrier on X product type, right? Because some of these things just happen. Some of these things happen because there's a change in underwriting, there's a philosophy difference, there's a risk change, and some of it's not black and white and communicated to you, right? So some of it, you start to kind of scratch your head and say, am I the only one seeing that? But understanding those trends and activities is important. And then we really encourage you to do a book of business analysis by carrier, understand the loss ratios and activities that you may have, and you see some of the things. And then Mark, if you can kind of talk through what you got roped into when you first came on board, right, and how it helped us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a book of business analysis on our what was it, the private client group, and we, I grabbed all the data that we had and put some things together, charts, graphs. And we had a meeting with all the producers, so they were on the phone with us as we went over this. And I would show loss ratios by producer, claims by producer. We're able to identify what clients are hurting the producer as far as the ones with the most claims, and maybe we need to fire that client basically. But it's being transparent with the producers and just kind of saying, hey, this is the type of business that you have. Are there any adjustments you need to make possibly? And maybe do you need to get off business, or do you need to shift to a different carrier? Is your carrier usage too much, with one? So I found it to be very, very helpful, and I know Brad and Warren and David did too. And it was kind of an eye opener in some places.
David, I know yesterday, I think you had mentioned, I know that Kevin had shared with us that I think that I believe the principals of SNA have done some carrier analysis, but we included the agents that were part of it, like Mark said, right? So the ones that were predominantly writing in the various carriers, because Mark, you did what, 5 carriers, I think, review?
5 carriers, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there was an agent that was a material writer in there, we wanted to share that information with them, right? They got to have a stake in the game as it relates to not only the revenue that's being generated, but if we're incurring some losses and they need to do something to help better manage to that, I highly encourage you to include those folks too, so they have skin in the game. But again, these were just different reports. I would assume that everybody from your management system, whether it's that or Mark, I think you actually went back to the carrier and asked for their kind of reporting too, right? So that we got a full view of their data. Because there are some fields and some different things that you're going to be able to see in that are going to be clues as part of that analysis.
Yep. Right. And remember, guys, a lot of people, when you start talking about, oh, we're going to share this and we're going to do this and that with the producers, they're thinking of it from a punitive standpoint.
Yeah.
We use this, and I would encourage you to use this kind of information as an educational standpoint. so that we can write better business, we can adjust what we're doing out in the field, that we can learn from it and do better as to be punitive. That's how we approach it, correct, Mark?
Yep, exactly. Yep. Right on
Well,
point.
Yeah, and even if you look at the chart, right, the one on the left is, and I've kind of truncated the names, but these are different agents that are writing agents, right? So this was on our pure book, right? So somebody, the one on the far left that had the highest loss ratio, he only had 3 claims, right? But because his participation with this carrier was so low, the first 2 were way out of bounds. The third one there, 59%, he had 30 claims, but he's got such a book of business with them. That's where we've talked about it. As you guys as a group are trying to take advantage of leveraging all of you writing with various carriers, you really have got to make sure that as somebody comes in and somebody starts writing a carrier, that they are up to speed very quickly. So you try to mitigate them disrupting the loss ratio, because if they're not new and they're placing business that doesn't have a natural fit with a carrier, it can come back to bite you, even though the person writing it doesn't have much business with them.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that came up in the first session, I don't know how this group breaks up, but somebody asked, okay, what are different methods to, if I got a client that is just hurting me from a loss standpoint? So we've got a lot of good agents in our group. We have a couple that very much day in and day out, I think, pride themselves on being very, very professional risk managers. So the couple of comments on this first slide is really his verbiage, one of the agent's verbiage, where he's talking about truly values their business, but is very upfront and says the losses are negatively impacting our performance with the carrier, and helps them understand that carrier relationship is precious to them. They want to try to be able to solve their needs, but one of 2 things can happen. And I think being transparent with a client that has repeat offense or has shown that they're going to have a lot of losses, or at least subject to a lot of losses, 1 of 2 things can happen. You can jeopardize, the client can actually jeopardize you as an agent of writing business with that carrier. Or secondly, the client's got to realize that if they're not going to pay maybe the proper attention to things, they're then themselves going to be very limited to have any kind of coverage, no matter what. Now, this agent is more commercially focused, so I think the ability to make adjustments and self-retention obviously may not transfer exactly over into personal lines. But the point that I'm trying to make and sharing from him is he shares this situation. He doesn't try to sugarcoat it. He doesn't try to dance around it. He says, Mark, the actions from you are really jeopardizing my relationship with the carrier and my ability to provide you the best coverage possible. And so you talk about then what are ways to be able to mitigate if at all possible. Take that a step further. The other agent that is a strong person, he goes the more blunt. So in the second part there on this slide, he just says, look, at some point you need to just be able to say, look, we're not a good fit. You're not a good fit with my agency. I'm not going to be able to satisfy your expectations. And I know several of our agents will sit there and say, maybe here's some other agencies that you should contact to move your business towards. So I don't know if anybody wants to share, if anybody's had some other experiences, but I can tell you, look, there's all kinds of all kinds of clients that can be quote unquote troublesome or more work, but the ones that are clients that on the surface seem like they've got a lot of lines of business, they may be okay, they may be a good risk, but their claim activity in and of itself is troublesome. This is some of the approaches that our agents take to be able to say, you're jeopardizing things too much and we need to move you away from us. Any comments from anybody? Anybody got any other different lines as it relates to talking to a client and saying, hey, maybe we should part ways? And then Mark, one of the other things that had come up from the first session, at least in one of them, was the claims training that you've done and how it can transfer over into helping have a better handle on loss mitigation. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah. What I do a lot with the producers and new folks coming in is do a lot of claim training, because I think it's important for the producer to kind of know that side of it, just so they can gain the trust of the customer as far as the, hey, they do know the process. Know the total loss process on the auto side. How do carriers get the values? How is that determined? Who do they use? Get familiar with a diminished value claim. You've probably heard of that phrase, diminished value, but do you know what it does and know what it is? And who can file a claim for that? Then you have OEM versus aftermarket. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. A lot of people are wanting the original manufactured equipment on the vehicle rather than aftermarket. But truly, me being in the business, there's only an exception to a couple vehicles where the aftermarket doesn't fit, but pretty much they're pretty equal in that. So in property, know what the endorsements mean. We talk about water backup. I'm sure you guys have a water backup endorsement, but what does it mean? Is it any different than a toilet overflowing? It is. It can be. No residential roofing materials. 3-tab, architectural shingles, T-lock shingles, metal roofs, types of metal roofs. Get involved there. If you've got a claim contact at a carrier, utilize them. They're happy to help you. And then, kind of know the adjuster timelines. Typically, carriers are going to say, hey, you could hear from an adjuster in 24 to 48 hours. Okay. Then they'll want an inspection made within, let's say, 3 days. And then once an inspection is made within 3 days, they expect payment to be made within 2. So those are some of the timelines, but and that's pretty consistent with all the carriers. There may be a little waiver in there on those dates, but that's pretty much it. But just kind of get familiar with your claims people. Use them as resources. They'll be happy to help you.
Hey, Mark, you brought up something that I didn't think of yesterday but we take advantage of. So for our Iscential office in Houston, where we predominantly write a lot of our business, we have a go-to claims provider, right? From a restoration, so from a colonial standpoint, right? We actually leverage them to help train our group too, right? So that you can hear from the people that are actually doing the repairs what they see, because a lot of times they can have a lot of insight to maybe even questions that you may ask differently for the next house, material, whatever.
Yeah, I believe we brought in Colonial Claims. They'll do a lot of flood training for us, and it can really educate the producers on the flood piece.
Right. Now, a couple of things that came up yesterday that I just want to mention and we'll provide, but I don't know how relevant it is to the folks who are on the call for this session. But again, we mentioned we're going to send the agent checklist. 2 other forms that we're going to send, just so that maybe you can compare and tweak, and if there's anything that's new that you can steal from ours. One would be a due diligence form, and that's when we're moving to an E&S carrier and how that acknowledgement needs to work, as well as rejection forms. We tell the story where we have implemented or talk about flood rejections. And I know it looks like Stephanie's having connection problems, but I know yesterday she told the story for one of the more significant recent storms in Houston from a hurricane standpoint. I think we had seven people come after us as it relates to saying that we wronged them from a flood coverage standpoint. All 7 had signed flood rejections. But really our kind of take on that was our CEO felt that we were probably chasing the rejection instead of trying to educate the client. And we use language which is explain to a client what it does, not what it is, right? So help them understand the reason why I'm recommending flood insurance isn't whether you're going to be able to project whether you're going to have a flood or not. But in a situation like this is when flood covers for you, and otherwise when it doesn't, right? So the lesson learned for us from a takeaway is all 7 of those people, we probably mismanaged. We probably didn't take the extra time to sell them on why we were recommending flood insurance and what it would do for them. And so anytime that you're selling those pieces, we recommend, go ahead, Stephanie, if you can.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, one of the other items that came out of that is that we had the rejection on file, but we did not have a flood quote on
right.
file that we had proposed that. And so that might have held more weight. Hey, we proposed it, we presented it, and then here's the declination versus just having the declination in the file. And so I know our inside sales team has a flood quote with every property proposal. Now, as a result of that, because again, we don't want to just chase the rejection because they said, no, I'm not concerned with flood insurance. We want to explain the facts that, 60% of the flooding incidents occur in low risk flood zones. I know you're in a low risk flood zone. I know when I purchased my first home, the sales individual and the real estate agent both said, you're not in a flood zone. And I said, oh, no, I am in insurance. I'm in a low risk flood zone. I am in a flood zone. We're all in a flood zone.
Right.
And so they've got that misinformation coming from their agent and coming from the bank. And then so you have to educate them because they just don't know unless you tell them. And
Right.
so we really want them to understand, if we have another Harvey, if we have another one of these incidents, are you going to be able to recover financially? So personally speaking, my parents flooded during Harvey and had no flood insurance. And it took them 3 years to get back to where they were. My dad was close to retirement. And as a result of the stress that they dealt with in Harvey, he had heart surgery, he had hernia surgery, he had a hip replacement. He's like the bionic man now. But it's unfortunate because they went through so much stress and financial burdens because of that. So it hits close to home.
Amen.
Yeah, we talked about it yesterday, and David, as you and I have been in a lot of different agencies. Look, everybody's got kind of their take on the process, right? There's the black and white standard things that are either kind of agency 101 or carrier driven, but you also start to adopt some additional things that are above and beyond. Stephanie just mentioned one, right? We had flood rejection, but we didn't have a quote. Well, if we'd had the quote, we would have felt way stronger as it relates to telling these folks, we fully tried to provide you and offer you the right insurance. So I'm assuming all the agencies on this call have adopted some things that are not necessarily out of the generic textbook, but they're gotchas that maybe you went through, or another agency that went through it, and you're like, wow, this is a pretty good safeguard. I never thought of that. So I would encourage you to socialize those with your group if you think it's something that can really help from really strengthening the process that you have. So kind of with that, what questions can we answer? What things did we not hit on that we take swing at or get you information on? Is there anything that we can provide some more dialogue around to you so that this is not an hour wasted and something can be beneficial for you? We hit it all, David?
Well, so I'm going to ask a question of the group. So I had an opportunity to talk with Kevin Painter last night. And one of the things that he's going to request from everybody who's participated, so I'd be interested in some thoughts now, is what's the one or two things after spending this time talking about loss control and evaluating your risks that you think you can do or your agency can do to help improve the individual agency or producer loss ratio or SNA's loss ratio overall?
Hey, do y'all have a standard new business fact find type form for an account, personal lines account that y'all utilize? And then with that, does it have some type of probing questions that are utilized to help eliminate someone who may not be a good fit for the agency based upon their responses? And that may be prior liability limits, prior number of carriers over the previous 5 years, you know, that they're always shopping, you know, always changing carriers or something of that along those lines.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we also talked about that a little bit yesterday, as far as kind of interviewing the client and finding out, why are you looking for a new agent? Why are you looking for new coverage, or a new carrier? I have a couple different fact finders that our producers use. And I know that our corporate sales team primarily is just asking those questions, pretty much what you just mentioned. Why are you looking for new coverage? Well, my rate went up. Okay. Um, along with everybody else. So looking at their current policy and their coverages and basically having the discussion of, well, the way that we do things is we're looking at how to protect you. And if we can find you the best rate, that's awesome. But we're looking to make sure that you're protected across the board. So, Brad, we could probably get some more pointed questions from Ashley and her team. But I do have a couple of different versions of some fact finders that we use to gather information so that we can begin the quoting process.
Yeah, we can definitely share those. And I know, Stephanie, to your point, Kevin's example yesterday was, an early indication if somebody calls you and all they really want to do is have you take a swing at their auto and they're not willing to share any of the other lines.
Right.
I know many agencies that say that's not what we're going to do, right? We're an agency that's here to provide counsel on all your risks. We as an agency aren't in the business of just trying to spit out quotes. So that's another one. But we can find what fact finders we have and send along. And again, I would cherry pick what either if you got one and there's something else that we ask and add to it, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, one of the agencies yesterday indicated that if they could not get a copy of the prior coverages, they wouldn't write it because it was to prevent them from E&O, where the insured would say, oh, well, I always had these kinds of limits, or I always had a rental coverage, or I always had whatever it is. And they could go, no, sir, we talked about that. Here's what you had before. Here's what we discussed, and here's what you ended up with. So they have that documentation in their file.
Brad, I believe Taylor has a question too.
Okay, go ahead, Taylor.
Well, actually, it wasn't a question. It was more answering the question that was asked of us. I mean, I think the biggest thing I've taken away from these is the right questions to ask to be a better fact finder and underwriter before I even start to quote it. And if I really want to write the business for myself or for the agency. And then the thing that you guys said today that really just stuck with me is explaining to the client what the coverage does for them, not just what it is. That's huge. It shows the value of it, not just another line item, and why it's important to them. and for them. So I've really appreciated, I feel like this is making me a better agent and gonna make my agency better.
And Taylor, I'm glad you called out that last part. Stephanie's been with Iscential for really kind of her whole time, and Stephanie, you've heard Warren evolve that. And Taylor, I either by line of coverage or type of coverage or a standard story. I know our CEO always gives the example. Hey, do you want, if you're a young couple, do you want renter's insurance? Or when your neighbor next door is careless and doing something and burns your apartment complex down or apartment building down, do you want the ability to replace your stuff? Right. So that kind of language as it relates to being able to explain what it does versus what it is very important.
Yeah, I've always been told, burn the house down with life
That's
insurance,
right.
kill the person, really make it real, paint the picture for them. So being able to do that with, like you said, whether it's a form of coverage or a line item endorsement, what it's important for and really making it real for them is, I think, super important.
Yeah, and let's face it, we selfishly did it not necessarily because of trying to avoid an E&O claim. We actually that's how we think we're different in the marketplace and how we sell. Right, that consultative. My job's to advise you the options that you have and help you get to as well of an educated decision as you can make.
Absolutely. If we're not doing that, then they might as well just go and buy it themselves online.
That's exactly right.
That's the whole
Yep.
point of being an agent for them
Exactly.
is giving them that education.
Yep, that's right. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I just want to make a comment. I love the checklist controls and that y'all are using, especially like I don't know if it was on this call or if it was somebody in our SNA group, how they take, request that the homeowner take photos of the outside of their house and send them in. And then going through the different checklists. And by the way, will y'all be providing any checklists for us to use as templates or anything like that later? Will that be anything? Okay.
Yeah, we're good because I'll give you the slides, but any of these different checklists that we've talked about, whether it be our new business checklist, the fact finder, the due diligence, the rejection, I'm going to send you what we have and I'm going to send it to the group, right? And you guys are more than welcome to use and plagiarize whatever you want from that.
Right. And I always, as a habit, probably since even on the business I had before insurance, is I always get all my clients to sign all the forms. So initial each page. And if there's something important on that page, like if it's rental car coverage or something like that, I'll give them to initial next to that. So so I don't just get them to sign the signature page, I get them to sign every page, especially if it's something important. That's saved me several times on somebody calling back up and saying, well, I really requested rental car coverage. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've referred back to the app and showed them, well, hey, you initialed right here on this page that you didn't want rental car,
Right.
and like that ends the conversation right there. And
That
so
makes
anyway,
a huge difference.
yeah, I even record calls and let folks know that I'm recording it, and then I'll put the WAV file on their file. So that way, that saved me one time where I had a commercial client that said something that she really didn't say, and I went back and listened to the call, and I sent it to her, and I said, "Go to minute number 32 and 15
Wow.
seconds, and hear what you
Yeah.
said." I don't do that all the time, but I got lucky on that one. But
Yeah. Wow.
some of that stuff helps. But thank you for all your guidance. This has been very good. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Tim, it's funny, and obviously you do that in a not a I told you so, but
No.
it's kind of it's a passive aggressive I told you so.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Hey, I went back and reviewed the call, and you bring up a good point. But hey, I go ahead and listen to minute number 35, 15 seconds, and I think we already we talked about that. So, and I didn't hear anything back from her on that.
Yeah.
So
I like that one.
Any other questions for the group, or to David's kind of question to close out?